This is F.D. Recovery, where we interview addicts and alcoholics.
Our aim is that through this podcast, we might help you on your journey of recovery.
Thank you for listening.
Yo, this is Frank with F.D. Recovery. It is Monday, July 7th, and a start of a new week, which means our weekly intention has come back around. So, all right. Last week was Pride and Ego. I did it with Dave. You guys heard it. It was great. Basically, if you're unfamiliar with the weekly intention, basically we work on a topic or a spiritual principle, work on it throughout the week and see how it went for us. And then we come and do a recap, and then we choose another spiritual principle and or topic to work on. So this week will be boundaries. Ooh, boundaries. But before we dive into that, we're going to tell you how Pride and Ego worked for us this week. Well, I had family over. Let's just start with that. And it was 4th of July. So it was pretty interesting. A lot of my ego showed up for me big time because, one thing you don't ever do is talk politics or religion, especially with people that don't see eye to eye with you. It's just not too smart. Me and my mom both got roped into a conversation, and, one thing led to another, and we got in a little argument, and I ended up, leaving, going to a meeting, and clearing my head that way. I mean, I came back home, and, we made amends and all that, but let her know how I was feeling, and, she kept circling around to, saying I'm this and that, being general terms. And, I took offense to it. And, I won't go too far into the mess, but, when I start being called compassionless and empathy, based off of her judgment of how she views people as a whole from either a political group or, or from a religious set, it just hurts, That's what I was kind of getting called. And, I've worked really hard in my recovery and where I'm at my personal life and also work life, where I'm just a lot of those things. I'm not a lot of those things anymore. And I have compassion today and empathy. So I allowed myself to get thrown off balance and, react to a certain way I didn't want to. I took offense to what she had to say, and I was driving on. To the meeting, and I just was kind of chuckling. I'm like, this is how my higher power works, right? I say I want to work on pride and ego, and then he shows it to me full blast. And it's just kind of funny how that developed, right? Also, there was some lessons to be learned, right? For me on my end, it's just like I didn't allow somebody to, identify me as these things that I am no longer, that I worked really hard to be not, or worked really hard to change, and the things that I'm not. And, I could have communicated it a little bit better in the beginning, but, the facts are, as I came back and I did communicate it better, and I said, I'm sorry if I, seemed angry and mad, and I didn't mean to be that way. But, when someone starts telling me I'm a thing that I'm really not, it got me hurt, and I worked really hard to, to get myself out of those behaviors. So when I have somebody, the first thing I like to do is see if anything, that I'm feeling is true, right? And, I've been all those things, and I've been compassionless and empathy. No, there was no empathy and all those things, and I was like, you know what, I'm not that, and that's not true, right? And and getting to where I've worked so hard and somebody trying to tell me how I am, it was a very frustrating situation, especially be it your mother, right? And we talked through it, and because the one thing that I know I'm not is a laundry list of things that she was insinuating, and she wasn't saying it really flat out, but the insinuations were there, and it's just like, okay, well, that's kind of hurtful when you talk about me in the same sentence as all these supposed things, and I'm being real vague because it's concerning another person. If it was just me, I'd just let it all swing, but the fact is, it was something that I had to work through, and then it being, I have a pretty small house, and there was over 6 people in the home, and and I had my younger sister here, but which was great because she's in a lot better place, and we're about 14 months apart, and it was just kind of cool to spend some time with her, and and she's seen what happened, and none of it was a big deal. Let me reiterate that. None of it was like a blowout like it used to be. Nothing got violent. It's just things got a little bit tense, and I learned today my skills to or my tools to, just, get a and then also my wife was there to talk some sense into us too. So I jumped in my car. I was pissed, but I took off. I knew better, and I gave myself that pause button that I utilize so much in recovery, and um, just working through those feelings and of emotions. It's like the whole pride and ego is a tough one, man. Spiritually, I'd like to think I'm over some of that crap, but then when it comes creeping in and rears its ugly face, it's there it is again. But it's not all bad, because you go through these, and you mess up, and you get back on the horse, and as far as spiritually, and you just take another crack at it and just get better and better and better and see where you need to improve, right? So um as far as pride and ego, that's how it showed up. It showed up, and I walked through it, right? Pride and ego is one of those things. I ended up going into a recovery home that I frequent often, and talking to talking to the guys in there, and seeing what they had to think about pride and ego, and it was just kind of a cool experience to kind of live out these weekly intentions in the meetings I go to, and also the meetings I help facilitate, and it's just it's pretty rewarding to kind of see this in action. So I get to live it and go and get to talk to with other men in recovery just starting out in rehab. So it's just kind of cool to pinball these ideas off them and hear what they have to say, because in there it's a little different. I try to keep it like a normal meeting, but we also can go back and forth, because a lot of those guys are about to graduate and go into the tea house. Like, that's the journey I took, and they have questions. Sometimes we just fart around and, tell jokes and just talk about recovery and some of the ugliness that happens um in the addiction is, it needs to be talked about. Some people like, don't share the mess. It's like, okay, well, don't get too far into it, of course, but that's you have to go into a level of disclosure with each other, and and there's also someone, especially in a rehab, is not going to fully identify with you unless you share some stuff about them where it sounds familiar. And just getting to that super I'm grateful, right? Being able to do this and go in rehabs and sponsor guys and take people through the steps, and still be able to do a podcast with my sponsor, and we call each other from a good amount, and we're about to have a barbecue on the 12th. So if you're listening and you know what Project Heart is, there's a barbecue on the 12th. Pioneer Park starts at 10, ends at 3. Yep, so show up. All right. So that pride and ego, I deal with it just like everyone else, right? My sickness is a little bit exaggerated from, other times, and sometimes it's tamed, but you know, I keep a good connection with my higher power. throughout the week, and it keeps me from those dicey situations, right? So if you're out there and you're struggling with pride and ego, best way to that I've found is get in service, and you'd be surprised how humble you get, because it's either get humble or you get humbled, right? And I'm just so tired of always being so prideful and sticking to my guns to where my higher power has to come in and teach me a lesson on a soulful level. And I'm learning to do that without that pain, right? This last little altercation, I wouldn't even call it that, more of just a tense moment between my mom and I. We've had a strong past. I felt real wronged. I worked really hard, and she was trying to call me privileged and all these other things. Man, I've been from the gutter, right? And I know I'm fortunate. I'm blessed to be where I'm at, but I wouldn't call me privileged, not in the least, right? You know, to cast that judgment onto someone else, not really respecting where the shoes that they've walked and the pain that they've been through, right? Because she doesn't really know my story. I didn't really get to know her until I was a teenager, and before that, it was just a handful of visits. So I felt really wronged in that situation, and we talked to it. And when I express a lot of this stuff that I'm saying to you guys to her, it's just like, man, I felt like you were just belittling my journey, and like I'm just some privileged person, and it's just not the case, right? Privilege is, it's a whole different ball game, coming from money and never knew struggles and all these things. And my dad was a hard worker, and he earned everything that he earned, right? So and he does pretty well for himself now. But growing up, it's not like we were rolling in the wealth. Maybe compared to my mother, because she was in extreme poverty. But we grew up in the hood, and my dad tried to move us around and eventually try to get us out of it. But there was a lot of abuse in home, and yada yada, the list goes on. So I felt really wronged when she called me privileged. I was just like, that's not even close to the truth, right? And she explained, I wasn't trying to talk about you, I was just talking about it in general. And I'm like, yeah, but you're talking to me, right? So it's like, how am I supposed to know the difference? So, but also working on my own sensitivity in that, in that correspondence with her. It's just, maybe I should took a step back and took a breath and understand it's not personal, right? But it's kind of hard when you have a rocky relationship with your mother, right? So there's that back and forth, feelings, emotion, logic, where you're just trying to work through that, right? And I had a chance to do that, and in the end, it was all about growth, right? And that's kind of what I'm facing, right? Because some of this turbulence before that baseline appears, right? Before you hit the horizon and it's smooth sailing, it's like, you gotta get through that turbulence, right? So that'll be enough of, let's see, boundaries. There we go. Well, no. All right, so let's look up boundaries. Definition. Let's look at the definition. A line, a line that marks the limit of an area and dividing line. Let's see. All right, having boundaries. Personal boundaries are the limits and rules we set for ourselves within relationships. A person with healthy boundaries can say no to others when they want to, but they are also comfortable opening themselves up to intimacy and close relationship. All right, let's see. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Uh, what is a boundary in psychology? Psychology, a boundary is a limit or rule that a person embellishes to protect their well-being and guide their interactions with others. It defines where it defines where one person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors end and another person's begins, and helps individual manage their emotions and physical space. Boundaries are essential for maintaining healthy relationships and preventing emotional or physical harm. Boundaries are essentially guidelines that individuals set for themselves to determine what they will and will not accept in their interactions with others. Wow. Okay. I gave us a decent little overview, right? So boundaries, right there. They're the guidelines of if you there's look like there was a few different definitions. There's boundaries, like boundaries on a map, like borders, or just boundaries of a city, things like that. County lines. There's boundaries, things that are kind of set of space, right? And then there's also, when you slip into the whole psychology of it within relationships, it's like I can think of, all my past experiences just being so void of any type of boundaries, right? And it was mainly, now when I think about it, it's mainly me pushing the boundaries of others and really disrespecting what, and manipulating their, you know, uh, where they're at, right? And just trying to heal that aspect of it. And that was a big thing with me, is trying to learn a new way of life and let go of these old character defects on a daily basis. But there was some overshadowing, um how do you say, challenges in my early recovery, because I didn't know how to be in a relationship. I didn't know what a relationship really looked like. Also friendships. I had a real jealous streak with relationships, so I took a lot of time off from, dating. Went wild there for my first part of my early recovery. The first year went kind of wild, and then did some work with the sponsor and took about an 8 month hiatus off women, because I was using, it's like you use drugs to change the way you feel. But I was using a person to change the way I felt. And I had to become aware of that, and not just become aware of it, but actually stop what I was doing and change the behavior. But after doing some self work, I realized, even the relationships that I have been in, they were just kind of run by night, fly by night, a couple months here, a couple months there. I was in a couple long term relationships, but nothing over 3 years, right? And it was always back and forth, so it wasn't even like a full straight, right? So I realized once I got in the new relationship right around COVID, there was no sense of boundaries, right? I realized I was so jealous in all my, and then it's very hard too, because when you get into a relationship and this person's not taking a hiatus like I was, so there's men knocking on the door. That's how it works when you're single. You got people investigating and knocking on your door, and they're interested. And it was a pretty rough patch in the beginning of mine and my wife's relationship. Without trying to indulge, it was mainly on my end, right? I took an 8 month hiatus off any relationship, so I pretty much shut all the doors, and I let people know where my boundaries were, because I had to create those to keep myself safe, and so I wasn't acting out on my character defects. And now that I was ready, I was getting with somebody, and they weren't doing that. They were just living life normally. And, well, whether it was abnormal or not, it wasn't my place to say. Right. So getting in with, so there was a lot of jealousy that popped up in the beginning, right? Because, I'm not used to allowing my significant other to have friends, and all these things, like at least guy friends, right? Um, so I had to learn all these behaviors and relearn them. And honestly, we just got to a point where, you know, um, where we worked on this stuff. And, and if I have crazy paranoid thoughts, she talks me off the ledge. And, they're brief, and they're more brief, and I have to address the gaslighting, the manipulation that I'm so used to, and just trying to free myself of that and just become cognizant of it. Because if I don't, then I cause a lot of harm, and to somebody that I say I love, right? And these are all those built boundaries within my navigation system that I'm trying to set forth. And it's a super hard task, because you know when you've learned, and you've well, maybe not learn, when you've developed these skills through different types of trauma. I realized most of my stuff was just echoed from my trauma. It wasn't even like it was maladaptive skills that I picked up just to survive. So those survival skills, right, I was thinking was the way to handle stuff. And, come to find out that it's not normal to, ask to see your girl's phone. It's not normal to trip out on stupid messages. It's not normal, right? So today I find myself not doing that. And when I do grab my girl's phone, it's looking for the text. Or actually, now when I grab my girl's phone, it's because she used to have the same case that, well, is my case technically, but she's using it. So I tend to grab her phone a lot, thinking it's mine because I'm used to having that old case. So today I can free myself of this self obsession of, I want to catch somebody before they do me wrong. And, it's just like it's just this, I want to not be made a fool of, or I don't need someone abandoning me. I got to abandon them first kind of deal. Cause all this stuff springs from my trauma growing up. Right. And so walking through that and, calling into a higher power just to give me the strength because, you know, left unchecked, my mind becomes a poorly edited kung fu movie where, shit's flying everywhere. And I got to really watch myself because, it can turn into it can get pretty violent and, there'll be kicks and, the shit thrown and, and then eventually turn into a horror flick real quick because the amount of paranoia that I induce onto myself through these borderline schizophrenic thoughts, right? That's just where my mind goes when I'm in my character defects and when I'm not aligned with God. So that's just a little bit of my journey and some of my struggles. And I know it's not pretty, but it is what it is, right? We got to start where we're at. We can pretend with ourselves and I can act like I'm not jealous. I can act like I don't get angry. I can act like things don't piss me off or get under my skin. I could act like I'm so confident in these situations, but what does it really get us pretending, right? So I know I'm going to do all those things anyways, right? As far as the whole acting, right? Because we're never, for me, it's like I'm never honest with myself immediate. There are more oftentimes now that I do get to that honest point. But for the most part, when I'm acting out my character defects, I'm totally in denial and totally in all that right? That ick that we talk about, that spiritual unwellness, that darkness, right? And when you're in that, it's a different ball game, right? Because back in the day, man, that's all I knew is just be dirty, be gross, and come up on people, and that's just not the way, right? So these boundaries, they help us navigate our reality, right? Before, I would just and then I would also let people just do whatever to me, right? And I'd let them back in my life, whether it be a girl, whether it be friends that did me dirty, But for a majority of my time out there, it was mostly me doing harm to others. And I can say that, pretty wholeheartedly. Don't get me wrong, there was other factors and people did me dirty, but for the most part, I was running around doing most of the dirt, and it's just getting to that place where I can do healthy boundaries and speak healthy and get healthy things out of it, right? And and just also not trying to take advantages of other people's weak boundaries. That's a hard one for me too, is because sometimes when I'll see somebody have weak boundaries or weak morals or weak this, I just kind of it attracts me, and that's part of my sickness is when I see somebody whether it be a person or I can come up on, I just have to really constantly be checking myself. And I'm never in a situation where I'm fucking somebody over anymore, but don't think that the thought doesn't cross my mind. I have to know where everyone's at, and our brains and our spirit is constantly calculating on a very soulful, energetic level. And, you got to process the good and the bad, and you must live and you must choose from that pivot point of what you're experiencing, right? So for me is, for me to just ignore the bad, and, that I don't think that's a really informed decision, right? If I'm just trying to block out all the bad and never really taking it into consideration and really dissecting some of these good and bad things, and am I really making the correct choice, right? So it's understanding both ends of the spectrum is when you're dealing with a possible situation that could unfold, right? You got to really look at things from almost a 30,000 foot view, and, take the me and my and I out of the situation, and, try to think about it logically, but also spiritful, right? If that makes sense. And also try to step forward honoring your emotions. And if you're angry, and, you got to figure out the core of that, right? You got to figure out, why am I scared right now? Why am I fearful? Right? We can run around and, do all these smoke screens, but to get down to the core of it, when you're in a conversation with yourself and you're in it to kind of heal it, right? In it to heal it, and getting to these pivot points of your spirit awakening. And that's like that's what I live for, right? When and you never notice it right away. Sometimes you do, don't get me wrong, but you never really notice it until a similar situation pops up, and it's after, and you're like, wow, I really handled that situation differently. And you can kind of give yourself um, a kind of pat on the back per se, right? And you're having a conversation with you and your God, and you're going, wow, man, I really handled that scenario better. And even with this argument with my mom, I handled that way better, man. Before, she used to have to call the cops on me in any kind of similar situation, because I'm throwing stuff through the wall, throwing stuff at the wall, cussing her out, flipping tables over, and just getting real violent. And, it wasn't, getting to that point of progress. We're like, okay, man, I can do this. I can get past this, and next time I will have an easier time with it, right? I realized having that conversation with her was much deeper than just that conversation. There was a lot of my trauma. And so when I took offense to that stuff that she dealt out, it was much more. It was the abandonment at such young age. It was, how dare you? You never were there for me. It was much more than that. And we talked about that. And um, so just getting past that pride and ego and stepping into that's just something I could work on with my boundaries. And, the reason why I chose this is because, my wife was, brought it up, and I didn't get a chance to tell her, but I heard it at a meeting earlier that week about boundaries, and I'm like, man, that might be my next topic. And then she said it in the backyard when we were sunbathing, and I'm like, oh, awesome, right? The little kitties and the kids in the pool, and she's farting around with the water pretty much, and we're talking, and, boundaries popped up again, and, and it clicked. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, that's the way it works in my life with these intentions. It's like I gotta let God lead the way. And the more I do that, the more I'm calm, the more I feel free. We talked about freedom in a meeting the other day, and it was right after it was right after that argument. I went straight there, and it was 4th of July, and we talked about freedom, and the lady shared her story. It was awesome. And I'm like, man, I'm not free right now. These emotions will hold me captive, and set me as a prisoner, right? I'm the prisoner and the guard at the same time, right? And I'm just so sick of doing that. But by the time I left that meeting, I knew why I went there. I knew why my higher power sent me exactly there. I knew why I sat out there for 30 minutes in my car, because, my higher power got me. He knows what to do for me, even though I don't know what to do for myself, right? The old me would have went and got bag and drunk, and just have too much proof and evidence in the past to, to know that there's a God involved here, because I know that under my own power, don't get me wrong, I recognize where I'm strong, where I'm weak, and, where I excel and all that. But, I understand that there's a higher power to this all. There's a higher messaging, a higher intelligence that, there's just something I've accepted in my life to this day where, it's looking out for me. Right. And if you're out there and you struggle with that, I did too. I can't say I got it all figured out, because I'm far from it. The thing that makes me so happy in this life is, if I knew everything all at once, could I really even handle it, right? Our God and our higher power gives it to us in bits and pieces, enough to chew on, right? Can't eat a whole elephant at once, but bite by bite, just maybe. Not really into eating elephants, but I never tried it though. So this week will be boundaries. If you follow along with us, drop a like, subscribe, share it. If you found this useful, use it in your recovery. Boundaries. Let's set forward the intention of boundaries this week and work that in our life, right? That's totally a spiritual principle. Boundaries? Are you kidding me? Try to live a spiritual life without boundaries and see how fast these challenges pop up for you, right? You have to have boundaries. It's crucial. Boundaries are the navigation system of your spiritual well-being, man, and even others, right? Recognizing other people's boundaries and respecting them, right? And that's important. So thank you guys. FD Recovery, boundaries. Love you guys. We out. Peace.
Thank you for tuning in to FD Recovery. A reminder, be kind to yourself on this journey of recovery. Also, call your sponsor, get connected to local support groups, and for one day at a time, stay clean and sober.